Hola, hola. This is your boy, Internal Sadist. And today's topic is going to be about the elephant in the room. Women, the the societal elephant in the room for all intents and purposes, is going to be the topic of today. And this is going to touch on multiple topics when it comes down to this. And I'm going to try to do this. I'm going to try to move it around along as efficiently as humanly possible. If you have any questions, feel free to stop me, slow me down, or ask me to clarify. Um, Typically, the topics are going to be women. They're pretty much easily to manipulate. They always self-sabotage themselves. The lack of self actualization. Crying is what they're good at also to get their way. um let's see. Shaming, lying, delusional, lack of self-awareness, self-projection, savior complex, god complex, lack of originality, victimhood mentality, fat acceptance, inequality, single mothers, rape culture, wants and needs, shifting blame. Let's see what else we got going on here. Yeah, shifting blame, irrational, lack of structure, false confidence, emotional and unsecure. Those are the topics that we're going to cover today when it comes to women, the societal elephant in the room. Now, for a lot of people know about these, and some people don't, pretend like they do. But the thumbnail pretty much explains it all for all intents and purposes in this video. So if you see the thumbnail, it pretty much explains what's going on in this whole entire thing. If you look at the thumbnail, you'll see the elephant, and it got different parts of the elephant in a room, and it's pretty much what it is. That pretty much explains all the stuff going on as far as the elephant in the room is concerned. What a lot of people don't know or understand about the whole entire thing with the elephant in the room is the ability to look the other way or pretend as if something's not existent or something is not their fault, or you know their ability to overlook things and not pay attention. And the sad part about that, we as a society has have been overlooking women for a long period of time to actually accept responsibility. Let it be, let it be from chivalry days to any other time in society. Women have always been overlooked to actually take responsibility for their own actions. They never were really groomed to take responsibility for their own actions. It's somewhat it's somewhat male's fault, but at the same time, like I tell people, if you know you're messed up and you didn't take the necessary steps to correct what you have, it's your fault just as much as the last person's fault. It's typically how it works. That's typically what I'd say when it comes to anybody who's not willing to take responsibility for any actions that they commit and or have. What's up, McDonald? Because at the end of the day, the problem with a lot of these people, especially women, is it's not the fact that it's not the fact that you're not willing to accept responsibility. It's the fact that how you go about it when you pass blame or pass stuff onto men. And basically, like I was saying, as far as the parts of the elephant in the room, you have reluctance, denial, ignorance, divergence, silence, awkwardness, and avoidance. That's pretty much the parts of the elephant in the room. It's typically how that works. Um, if you missed that, you can always go back and look at the thumbnail to actually understand where that actually comes from or where I'm getting that from. The thumbnail basically explains it all. The thing about the thing about women that women fail to realize in society, especially in society today, is that a lot of the stuff that a lot of the stuff that's going on around them, or that they're having problems with, or having problems with overcoming, is brought upon by themselves. What I mean by that is women tend to try to, instead of actually taking blame, which they always pass on to something else, An inanimate object. They'll blame an inanimate object if they have to. They'll blame the bowl, the dishwasher, everything else but themselves. Typically, is how it works. Instead of taking responsibility for their actions, they'll go and they'll go and blame something else, or say it wasn't their fault, or make every excuse in a book to basically say it wasn't their fault. When in fact, when you make a decision in life, you basically have to live with the consequences of the decisions that you make. For every, in other words, like they say, there's consequences for your actions. There's consequences for every decision you make. For every action, there's a reaction to what you do. It's typically what they say and do. However, you have a lot of times you have women who will sit up here and make excuses for why they're in the messes that they're in, why they're why they're not as far as they possibly could be, or why they're not on on schedule for learning and or anything under the sun that they can possibly be a part of or overcome, and or why they're not on par with other people. They'll make excuses on why they're not on par with other people instead of actually trying to correct themselves and make themselves better so they can make it to be on par with other people. Sad part about that, women have this ability to do so, and they also have this ability to act out accordingly to various things as far as societal pressures and or other things or otherwise. Another reason why I say that is because women have the habit of self-sabotaging themselves. But they'll blame a man, they'll blame another person, they'll blame the cat, they'll blame the dog, they'll blame God, they'll blame a bowl, they'll blame the dishwasher, they'll blame everything else, but they're not willing to take that responsibility for themselves. It's typically how it works. But the children have to take the responsibility, but they don't have to take responsibility at all. Which actually I really found funny, especially when a woman has a daughter. She'll blame her daughter for all the reasons why she's going through stuff, but her daughter's not allowed to place the blame back on her because for all intents and purposes. And the funny thing about that is you'll run into a lot of women who will do this, and they'll what's the word I'm looking for? And they'll pretend or act ignorant or act like they're unaware of what's actually happening around them, or they'll play victim despite the fact that they caused the whole entire scene. It's typically like the funny conundrum of Karens that are popping up nowadays. Like there was the one Karen in the store that was trying to belittle and or disrespect the Latina, and what happened was the Latina wasn't standing down, so Karen got in her face and porched her. The Latina slapped her. That lady's glasses got all crooked. She fixed her glass. Oh my God, did y'all see what you did to me? Like, meanwhile, she porched this woman, and she was way bigger than this woman. She porched this woman, and now she's trying to act like the bigger, even though she's way bigger than a Latina, she's trying to act like the victim in the whole entire situation. This is typically how women act. And the sad part about that is this goes across the board for all women from all walks of life when it comes down to it, that they're not willing to accept responsibility for their actions. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some women in certain cultures who will accept responsibility for their actions and will move right along, but typically those women tend to be criminals when it comes down to it. Um, the funny thing, another interesting thing when it comes to women is, like I was saying, their ability to their ability to avoid, like a good example, women will also do stuff like make up things like fat acceptance, or instead of improving herself, you got to accept them for being fat. Instead of wanting to shave her legs, you got to accept her for not wanting to shave her legs or her arms or her armpits or all this other stuff. It's typically one of them things where, like, women will say something to the extent of, well, that was a patriarchal, grooming and shaving legs and weight loss is a patriarchal thing. It's not. It's really not. The sad part about that is that was actually created by women. That whole entire regime that women go through was created by other women. And the funny thing about that is, it's one of those things where you just got to laugh at women because they're not really able to take responsibility, nor do they want to give credit where credit is due, even when credit is actually, because the beauty regime is not bought on by men, because there's not a man around here that taught a woman how to put on makeup. It was another woman that taught a woman how to put on makeup, and it was passed down from generation to generation to generation to generation. But the problem is, women would tell you that that's patriarchy, and that's a part of the patriarchy. Patriarchy when it comes to taking care of yourself. The sad part about that is, if you want to get technical, there was a time in England where nobody bathed and the Black Plague rolled through. So is that patriarchy or what's that? So in all technicality, if you don't bathe, we should accept you for not bathing. If you don't take care of yourself, people should accept you for not taking care of yourself. That's typically how that works. But the sad part about that on the flip side is, if it's a man, it's a whole nother story. He's fat, he's this, he's that, and the fat shaming begins, and the body shaming begins, and the fact that he stinks and he's not taking care of himself begins. And that's typically how it works when it comes to women. It's fine for the women, but it's not fine for men. You see what I'm saying? And that's typically how a lot of this stuff works when it comes down to it. When we start talking about a lot of the stuff that people go through, and a lot of the stuff that women tend to get themselves into. Another good example I've talked about multiple times in videos is rape culture. Now, I've talked about rape culture a lot in a lot of my videos. I hate to have to say it on YouTube because they tend to want to thump it, but at the end of the day, I equate rape culture to this. Just because just because I own a Morgan Super Sport and I want to park it in the middle of the hood with the keys in the ignition, doesn't mean I necessarily could do that and it not be stolen. Typically, that's my thoughts when it comes to rape culture. The problem with the problem with rape culture is, you can't go out here presenting yourself in a certain way and expecting stuff not to happen to you. Like I've said multiple times in many videos. What's up, Lorsos? How you doing today? And my day is going pretty good. Um, you can't go out here expecting stuff not to happen to you if you present yourself in a certain way. Because at the end of the day, like I've said multiple times, there are 15% of the population will do sick, vile things to the human body and or any living thing. So just because you want to go out here half naked, or just because you want to go out here dressed a certain way, doesn't mean that that group of people are going to stop because you should be treated fairly. There's a reason why they're the 15% of the population that'll do sick, vile things to the human body and or living animals. They're not going to stop because you're empowered. I've never seen somebody go, "I'm a woman, hear me roar," or I'm an independent woman, you should stop what you're doing. Nobody's going to do that. They're just going to laugh at you and probably do what they want to you. Let it be rob you, murder you, rape you, whatever the heck. Yeah, because that doesn't stop anybody. Yeah, because the last time I checked, telling somebody that you're an independent woman really stopped the last person from doing what they want to you, or stopped them from making any crazy decisions or doing anything to you that is sick and vile for all intents and purposes. And this is the problem that women have. They want to pretend like the world is unicorns and rainbows, and just because they're a certain thing, that everything should stop for them. The problem with that is, a good example of that is, just because you think white men are privileged doesn't mean that white men don't get shot at the same rate by police that black men do. It's that simple, because white men do get shot at the same rate as black men do. The sad part about that, they don't get put in, they don't get, not only they do not get shot, they get killed by police or killed in police custody at the same rate as black men do. But we sweep that under the rug, and we want to advertise black people being this happening to just black people for some odd reason, despite the fact that it happens to Asians, it happens to Latinos, it happens to white people, it happens to Arabs, it happens to Indians, it happens to everybody for all intents and purposes. And the sad part about that is, we want to paint under the guise that it only happens to a certain group of people. The sad part about that is, in reality, it happens to everybody. But we want to paint it in a light that make it sound like it's only one person that's oppressed, one group of people that's oppressed, which is sad. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. There are some things that happen where it was unfair. But at the end of the day, it's all about how you carried yourself and how you conducted yourself to quite possibly get yourself out of that mess. The sad part about that is, women don't understand how to do that, and they want to act as if they're above any and all. What's the word I'm looking for? Any and all standards that a man can have. Like, Like a good example of that is they're allowed to have all the standards in the world. The minute a man has standards, now they're now they're racist, or um they're fat phobic, or they're, you pretty much name it. The list goes on with all the phobics. For all intents and purposes, it's like one of those things where it's like, because you don't want to date a fat woman, now you're fat phobic. Because you don't want to date a trans person, now you're transphobic. Because you don't want to date a gay person, now you're gay phobic. Because you don't want to date a black person, now you're racist, or um stuff along the lines of that. And the sad part about that is it's not the fact that it's called preference. The sad part about that is, now if you were to flip that back on women, their answers would be totally different. Like a good example of that, there was an interview with a woman that was a feminist, and said, they basically literally asked her flat out, would you trade a transgender person? She said no. Then a person asked her, how was that not transphobic? She goes, well, it's different because she basically came up with some convoluted answer on why it was different. But he says, well, that's not a good answer. That's not a good answer at all. And the sad part about that is she got so upset, she stormed off. And that's sad to watch. And the sad part about that is, typically a lot of times when you see that happening, you'll see women shift on the same topic that they normally try to pin on men for being all these phobics, or all these aces and phobics for all intents and purposes, which I've always found funny. Because if you're a man, if you have standards, then you're racist or transphobic, or you're either racist or phobic for all intents and purposes, or you're prejudiced or phobic for all intents and purposes. It's typically how that works. Because you as a man, you're not allowed to have standards. Like a good example is, I'm waiting for them to actually come up with a term for not wanting to date single mothers. They haven't came up with one yet, but I'm pretty sure they will sometime soon. Because you don't want to date a single mother. They'll probably say you're single mother, you're single mother shaming, or they'll probably say you're single mother splaining, or some stupid stuff like that. Is typically how that works. So it ends up being one of those many things that women tend to try to dodge and or get around by not ever, what's up, Americus, by not ever really taking responsibility for their actions, or never having to accept the fact that never have to accept their hypocrisy, or their hypocritical stance on things when it comes down to it. Because at the end of the day, the men have to accept everything, women have to accept nothing but what they're willing to accept. And it's like, wait, no, that doesn't work like that. This is not how life works. And the sad part about that, if you say that to somebody, then you're racist, or you're this, or you're that, you're this, you're that, and the other. And this is typically how women always silence the opposite side, or the opposite gender for all intents and purposes, because most of the times the person is probably embarrassed out of society, or embarrassed out of obscurity, or they probably got cancel culture for all intents and purposes. Because a lot of people always end up with death threats for having an opposing view to leftists for all intents and purposes, which I've actually found funny. But the funny thing about that is, the minute they get a death threat, now they want everybody to feel sorry for them. But the minute you get a death threat, you deserved it. The minute they get a death threat, you got to feel sorry for them. You got to drop what you're doing to actually come to their rescue and their aid, to protect them from these people who want the harm, who seek harm to them. But it's perfectly fine when you have the harm coming your way. It's typically how this stuff works, which which is actually pretty interesting. Um, and another funny thing about that is people tend to how women tend to manipulate a situation to make it sound as if, they're a victim, or they'll manipulate it to a way that makes it sound something like so ridiculous, like they're a victim, but they're a savior. They're a victim, but they're the ones that can save the world and change everything because they're just and right. Wait, you can't be a victim, you can't be a savior at the same time. You got to be one or the other. You can't be you can't have that Caesar Borgia victim savior complex, because it doesn't work like that. Those are oxymorons. That's like saying I'm Tico and I'm black white. Like think about that. Like, I'm black but I'm white, but I'm black but I'm white. Like, but I'm really white. No, that doesn't make any sense. That's an oxymoron. You can't do that. And the sad part about that is women seem to can always corner the market on that delusional think or delusional thought process. And I've always found it funny on how they can get away with it. And men, if a man does one thing, he gets crucified, vilified, or cancel culture for all intents and purposes when it comes down to it. And the sad part about it is when you watch people abuse their abuse a position, because a lot of the times women, you give a woman an inch, she'll take a mile, or she'll take a journey, or she'll take a freaking vacation for all intents and purposes on that on that inch that you basically gave her. Um, but the problems with this, and the problems with a lot of the women in this day and age, is the fact that they have this problem with they have this problem with believing that they're greater or better than what they really are for all intents and purposes. So their ego and their ego and their self worth is blown up so far out of proportion. It's ridiculous. Um, it's like they have this over like ridiculously overinflated ego. And the sad part about a lot of these women is when shit happens, where like a pandemic happens, they realize that they can't do things by themselves when they try to go to the store and buy toilet paper or Lysol or flour or all this other great stuff. And then they be thinking about where's a man at for all intents and purposes. Because the sad part about that, when stuff like this happens, women seem tend to start looking for men to help them, or looking for a man to put in their life so they can actually help them. And this is typically how this works. The sad part about a lot of these women is they actually have men in their lives. The problem with it is it's not the men that they actually want. They have men in their lives, but it's not the men that they want next to them at night. And that's typically how a lot of this stuff works. And it pretty much goes into like a lot of the stuff that they think they're so great that they don't have to accept anything. But then when stuff happens, not only are they scrambling to find help from the man that they want, or scrambling to find a man out there, it's all about like it goes from it's still about inequality, because at the end of the day, when it comes down to inequality, women don't want equality. They want inequality. They want they want to be men, but they want all the benefits of being a woman, if you know what I mean. Like they say, well, don't treat me like that. Don't be patronizing. The funny thing about that is there's a story about like a feminist who says, I don't want to be, you're treating me like I'm a victim and this, that, and the other. Like I can't do that, like I'm helpless and this, that, and the other. The funny thing about that same feminist who said this in on a video. I remember me and my me and my daughters had went to a Cold Stone Creamery, and she was talking all this mess on the live stream, and I happened to see her. I noticed her, so I opened the doors for my daughter, and I let the door shut in her face. Like let that sink in. I opened the doors for my daughter, and I let the door shut in her face. So she got mad because I didn't want to hold the door for her, and she had an attitude the whole entire time. And it was like the funniest thing in the world, because like she followed us from Cold Stone Creamery to the actual restaurant that we were going to. Literally, she got in her car and followed us to the next restaurant just so she could sit near us, so she could actually complain about me not holding the door for her, and we're all the gentlemen at, and this and the other. This is typically how feminists think. Because the sad part about that is they'll say, well, I don't want no man to hold the door for me. I don't want no man to do this for me. I don't want this, that, and the other. The minute something happens where a man lets the door shut in her face, now she's upset that a man didn't hold the door for her. And that was the funniest thing in the world. And my daughters were laughing the whole entire time. They just found it funny. They recognized the lady from a YouTube video. And it was like the funniest thing in the whole entire world. And we ain't say nothing to her. We just sat there and laughed at her the whole entire time while we were eating dinner. And it's just stuff like this that actually lets you know that women don't want equality. They want to be they want to complain about being treated like victims, but they still want the victim. They still want the trappings of being a victim and a patriarchy for all intents and purposes. And what I mean by that is they still want the door held for them. They still want their coat. They still want the chair pulled out for them. They still want the man to open the door for them. They still want all these other things. They still want all these benefits of being a woman, even though they're a feminist. And that's typically how that works. But the sad part about that, they'll tell you that they don't want it. Now, the funny thing about that is there are a lot of people that would say that I was being mean to that woman. I wasn't being mean to that woman. She said don't hold the door for her in the video, so I didn't hold the door for her. Well, Tico, you should be. No, I'm not. I'm not being mean. I actually did what she actually asked me to do. Therefore, she had the door in her face. What you want me to do? Don't don't say something that you don't mean. Which brings me to my next point when it comes to women. The societal elephants in the room is their irrationality, their emotion, and the fact that they what they want and what they want and what they need is two totally different things. Like women will say they want a lot of things, or women will say they want a lot of things, but what they need is not being met. And the sad part about that, this is typically how you end up with a lot of unhappy women. Because at the end of the day, it don't matter how many wants you got lined up for yourself. If your needs are unmet, you're going to be an unhappy person. This is typically why you got a lot of unhappy feminists running around here complaining about all the men not stepping up, or the men need to step up, or where all the economically attractive men went, or where have all the attractive men, or where have all the men gone, or what they call it, the man desert, stuff like this. There's basically saying a lot of stupid stuff like this, and it's their fault. At the end of the day, it's your fault that we're in this mess. Therefore, the minute you can actually accept the fact that it's your fault, the faster we can actually get out of this mess. But the problem is, though, like I said, when it comes to women, women are like drug addicts for all intents and purposes when it comes down to it. You have to actually admit that you have a problem first so you can correct the problem and better yourself as a human being. That's typically how that works. And that goes for anybody across the board. You can't just help an addict if the addict is not willing to help yourself. That's pretty much how it works. Because the minute you help an addict, you're basically just throwing money or resources at a bottomless pit. Is pretty much how that works. If a person can't admit that they actually have a problem, there's no point in even helping that person in the first place. And that's pretty much how that works. As I said, with rape culture, women pretty much women pretty much perpetuate rape culture for the fact that they do the stuff that they do to end up in the messes that they end up in. Or, I mean, if a good example of that is if you're on the college campus, or if you're out late at night, typically what you're supposed to do is keep your wits about you. And if you're not exactly sure about your ability to defend yourself, normally you'll walk in a group of people. Two, three, four people walk in a group of people for all intents and purposes. That way somebody could call the cops, somebody could rake somebody's ass, and somebody could probably throw dirt in somebody's ass for all intents and purposes, so you can all get away. Or somebody could kick a person in the nuts. You basically want to have that extra person there with you. Sad part about that is the reason why it's not the fact that men are comfortable with being outside alone in the dark. It's the fact that they have no choice but to be outside alone in the dark. And this is where women always deflate this whole entire problem with, well, I want to be comfortable like a man and not feel scared about being outside in the dark and being alone. No, the fact of the matter is most men are scared to be outside alone, but the problem is they're not gonna verbalize it for the fact that they're forced to be out there alone in public and not have to take help. That's typically how this stuff works. Women always say, I want to be comfortable like a man. If you actually were in a man's shoes at any given time, you would be shitting your pants if you were a man. That's typically how this works. A man's just as a man, he's not as scared as a woman, but he's almost as scared as a woman being outside in the dark, especially if he's in a neighborhood he knows nothing of or is not familiar with. A man's always going to be uneasy. That's the sad part that women don't seem to understand. Just because we look a certain way, that don't make us comfortable. Because what a lot of the things that women fail to realize is men are good at controlling their emotions and staying stoic. So even if we're scared, we don't look scared because we look stoic. Even when we're scared, we're probably still sitting there cracking jokes to make it sound like we're not scared. That's typically how men work. They use any type of thing to make it so that they cannot look or appear to be timid or scared of anything or look brave for all intents and purposes. This is typically how that's typically how a lot of this stuff will work. And the sad part about that is, like I said, it's not the fact that men are comfortable with going outside and walking on the street at night by themselves. It's the fact that they have no choice because this is how society made it. Women can walk around in groups. Men don't really walk around in groups so often. If they do, 9 times out of 10, they're probably walking back to their car together and they probably parked in the same spot. It's typically how that works. And the sad part about that is when you actually talk to women about this, well, I want to be comfortable like a man. Well, you have no clue what a man is going through a man's mind when he's actually walking outside at dark. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some cocky men that will tell you in a heartbeat that they're not scared, but deep down inside, if you actually look them in the eyes, they're actually very scared. Because that cockiness is a nice way of overplaying your hand and actually making it seem as if you're not scared when in fact you really are scared. It's basically a defense mechanism for fear. Cockiness is a defense mechanism for fear, along with along with um stoicism and humor is a nice way to actually diffuse fear in a human in a male for all its purposes. Um, the sad part about that is women believe that men are just more comfortable. Well, men are more comfortable with going through society for the reason that they were psychologically trained. That's what they got to do, and that's what they are. And they got to be the protector and the provider, and this, that, and the other. So, in all technicality, you wanting that type of man actually negates the fact that you believe in feminism or equality for the fact that at the end of the day, you still want a man to protect you, but you want to be strong and independent. And you believe all men. The sad part about that, here's the funny thing about feminists that everybody keeps on overlooking. A feminist could say that I don't want this, I don't want that, and I can fend for myself. The minute a feminist gets the shit slapped out of her, now all of a sudden she cries and now she wants her white knights to come to her rescue to defend her. You see how that works? You see how that works? That's irrational, illogical shit that women say for all intents and purposes to make it sound as if if they can handle themselves when in fact they really can't. Another good example of that is the 3 or 4 women who carried a refrigerator up the stairs. Now, if you know anything about men, 9 times out of 10, if you would have had a dolly and one man could have took that whole entire refrigerator up the stairs. Well, if it took like 3 or 4 women to make it to the top of the stairs with a refrigerator, that technically wasn't even a full size refrigerator. It was like it's not a mini fridge. It was like in between. It was like just a small step below your usual standard fridge for all intents and purposes. So it's like, oh, really? You just carried up a not so standard fridge? Like, really? We're supposed to be pat you on the back, and it took you how long to do it? Several hours. Yeah, because if I was a man and I had and I had to carry a fridge up the stairs, I could get that in under an hour, 35 minutes or less for all intents and purposes. Is typically how that works. And hell, if you want to get technical, there's a video with a guy on a bicycle that put a fridge on his left shoulder and rode down the street on his bicycle. So that feat means nothing to me for the fact that it took multiple of you to do a job that one man could do. It's typically like that's typically like what they say about various things and people when in society when it comes down to it. They always want to talk about how they always want to talk about how strong women are when in fact they really didn't do anything that was impressive. Like it's one thing if you like do something like if you know beat Husain Bolt in a foot race, then I'll be like, okay, that's impressionante, impressionante. That's pretty much what I will say to you for all intents and purposes. If you actually beat if you're a female, you beat Husain Bolt in the foot race. I would give you all the props in the world. Now, the sad part about that is now we got a bunch of women that believe because their head is so hopped up on unicorns and rainbow juice that they believe that they could beat any men, any professional male team in a scrimmage game. Like, think about that. Here's how delusional women have gotten in this day and age. They believe that they can beat a male professional team of the same sports at sports. Think about that for a second. And the sad part about that is it cracks me up. It cracks me up for the fact that women believe that they can actually do this, and they're so delusional on believing that they can do this that it's like, wait, lady, what? You can do what? Like the one basketball player believes she could beat another basketball player in one-on-one game. Like I've seen some women that can play some basketball, but I've also seen men who weren't that great at basketball, that were mediocre at basketball, beat women that were really, really good at basketball. Now let that sink in. A man that's mediocre at basketball beats a woman who is supposedly really, really good at basketball. Like, yeah, no. And my other favorite thing is you'll hear women say, I can deadlift 160. I know an out of shape fat man that can deadlift 160. Your point is, like, and it's just stuff like this that just blows my mind when I hear women say stuff to try to make them seem as if they're better or better than what they really are, or have a disinflated ego and they think they can do all this stuff. And the sad part about that is these same women will be the same women that will actually boast that they will sit here and boast that they can and the sad part about that is they'll boast that they can do all this stuff, but then when they're up against they'll basically play that team or play a team of that caliber or play a low grade version of that team in that sport and then they'll lose. But then they'll say, well, it was unfair or something like this happened and it was unfair. So then they'll put them up against college kids and the college kids blow them out. Then they'll say that was unfair. So they'll put them up against high school kids and they'll blow them out. And that was unfair. Then they put them up against middle school kids and the middle school boys still beat them in the basketball game. Like, think about this stuff. Like the middle school boys can beat professional women's basketball team. Middle school kids whooping on professional women basketball players. How good do you think you are when you're getting beat by a middle school team, all boys team? Like, no, it doesn't work like that. I'm gonna take a while, guess, to say you got horseback riding or motorcycle riding skills. But yeah, it's just stuff like that that just blows my mind when you hear some of the craziness that women say, or hear some of the stuff that they do and want to portray themselves on being able to do when in fact they really can't do it. And my favorite has always been like, how people always want to how they trick themselves delusionally into believing that they can do all this great stuff when in fact they can't. Because at the end of the day, all a woman has is her imagination and her emotions. That's all she has. Without her imagination and her emotions, she pretty much wouldn't be able to probably pull together anything or put together anything to remotely be able to do anything half as good as a man. Um, at the end of the day, we've seen on YouTube a bunch of fights where two women try to jump a man or four women try to jump a man and they end up all knocked out or laid out on the ground for all intents and purposes. Or you'll see women trying to go up against a man and end up knocked the heck out. It's typically how a lot of this stuff works. You can't sit up here and tell me that you're equal to a man and you just got laid out by a man. It's like it doesn't work like that. You actually got to show me proof that you're equal. It's not you can't just tell me you're equal to a man. You actually got to show me you're equal to a man. Another problem with women that I've noticed with a lot of them is their ability to blame the opposite sex for not being right or not being right for them or not being able to do right by them or being too sensitive or being all this stuff. The sad part about that is once you boil it all down to nothing, boil it down to its basis form, at the end of the day, at the end of that man who you see as nothing or see as incompetent or seeing as all this stuff is actual mother who made him that way. So you have no one to blame but that mother for making that boy that way. At the end of the day, you have no choice but to blame the mother for making the boy that way. And this is typically what I talk about with a lot of this stuff when it comes to people. And at the beginning, it's pretty much the mother's fault why the boy's in the mess that he's in. It's the mother's fault why the boy grew up sensitive. It's the mother's fault why the boy probably ain't gonna be able to is socially awkward, can't get a girl, um, can't progress as a human being, can't progress as a man, can't do anything to basically fend for herself and or not without needing his mama behind him to basically clean up behind him. It's typically stuff like that. So it's the mother's fault at the end of the day on why the boy is the way he is. But the sad part about that, if you say that to a woman, she'll say you're being mean. Or what about the single fathers? Okay, that's nice. What about the single fathers? Go ahead. Go, tell me about the single fathers. And they typically tell you about the single fathers, and you go, well, that's nice and all, but at the end of the day, there's two parents in that whole entire situation. If one didn't want to have kids and the other one wanted to have the kids, it's that person's fault that wanted to have the kids because she thought just maybe by having this kid, she could keep this guy around, when in fact she just made an improper decision or just a poor decision in general. And the sad part about that, women make poor decisions and poor judgment calls on a regular basis. Nobody calls it out, but everybody wants to praise them for a half-ass or a finished product, a half-ass or a not so finished or a bad product for all intents and purposes. Because at the end of the day, there's something I've always found funny about women in our society. Anytime a child does good or grows up good, the mama gets all the praise. Now, anytime a child grows up wrong or in a justice system, they blame they blame they blame the fathernessness of the household. It's typically how they pretty much twist it. Now, don't get me wrong, that plays a huge role in it. However, at the end of the day, all this could have been prevented had you swallowed your child and or got an abortion. You could prevent all this stuff. So you can't sit up here and tell me that all this stuff and your child turned out like this and it not be your fault. At the end of the day, it is still your fault as a parent how your child turns out. I don't give a damn if another parent was there or not. It's still your damn fault as a parent to actually help make sure your child gets the best opportunity in this world to turn out properly and to become a productive citizen of society. So what you can't sit up here and tell me is that it's somebody else's fault when in fact you were in charge of the whole entire care. Okay, that's nice that you're blaming this person, but what were you doing the whole entire time to prevent this from happening? What were you doing? And the sad part about that, women can't answer this. They tend to revert back to doing it alone or trying to make you feel bad about them doing it alone when in fact you had options. You could have aborted the baby or swallowed the baby, but you didn't. And now you ended up in this mess. How are you going to correct this? Or how are you going to mitigate the damage that's already done to this child? Well, it's not my thing. It's the dad's fault. Okay, no, it's not the dad's fault. You decided to raise the child. It's your fault now. It's not the dad's fault anymore, especially if the dad never wanted the child. It's not his fault. He said he didn't want the child. You decided that you wanted the child. Therefore, it's your fault now. Don't get it twisted. Because at the end of the day, this is the thing I've always found funny about women. If a man wants a child, a woman can abort it, there's not a damn thing he can do about it. If a man doesn't want a child, she can keep the child and collect all the cash and prizes with the child. This is typically how this stuff works. So you can't sit up here and tell me that a man was of any importance when woman can pretty much make the decision to abort a baby with a man who wants a child and keep the baby with a man who doesn't want the child. And this is typically how a lot of these relationships actually begin for single mothers. A man didn't want the child, so you had the child. A man wanted the child, so you aborted the child. Like, how is that logic? How is this working? How explain to me how this is actually a smart, sound decision? Because the sad part about that is women will make erratic decisions like this or split second decisions based on their emotions or something that they think could benefit them. Women will never make a decision based on long-term gain. They'll make a decision on basically, unless it's marriage. That's the only way they'll make a decision on long-term gain if it's marriage. Every decision that they make is short-term benefit gain. That's typically how that works. And the sad part about that is then they wonder how they end up like this, or they wonder how they end up poor. And the sad part about that, if you look at the statistics for women versus men, women make less money than men in certain areas because that's the careers that they chose. If you look at the economic thing, and the funny thing about that, it goes for single fathers too and single mothers. Single fathers make drastically more money than single mothers do. Funny story. Funny story. The sad part about that is most of the single mothers are either on welfare or they have low paying jobs or they have no education or they have no job skills or on the job training or no trade training and stuff like that. So now typically you're going to get these low paying jobs for this reason because you need to take care of children. This is typically why women end up in like teaching or counselors or you know McDonald's or fast food restaurants or customer service, stuff like that for all intents and purposes. Because at the end of the day, I always found it funny how women could blame a man for not being in a house, but a man is always prepared to take care of children because he has the necessary education to do so. So the fundamental difference between women and men is economically is a single father is making anywhere between what 30 to 50,000 a year, roughly, is the pretty much the bracket that a lot of single fathers actually make or bring home. That's probably low balling for some people because I know some fathers they're making 100K, 90,000, 70,000, 200,000, $400,000 a year. The sad part about that is those those are probably like what's these. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of those men, so you can't really write them off as like you can't really write them off as what do we refer to that as a outlier because there's a lot of those men that actually do that as a single father. However, when you actually look at it, women make anywhere between 3,000 to about 23,000, maybe 29,000 at max a year as single parents. Um, even when they're single, even when you're just counting the single without being the parent, men tend to make more than women on average as single people. Sad part about that, women tend to work in mediocre jobs like barista, McDonald's, fast food, service injury, stuff like that. And this is typically why they're making less money. It's not the fact that, they're doing the same job as a man to make less money. It's the fact that they're doing less hours in a lesser job with lesser responsibilities is typically why they end up making less money. And the sad part about that, they'll try to equate it as they'll try to say that it's unfair and men make this much money on a dollar and this, that, and the other, and women only make this much. The sad part about that is if you actually go back and look at the thing, only reason why it's like that is because they also included women who work part time in that equation. You can't include people that work part time in the equation and then not turn around and include men who don't work who do work part time in that equation. So you're basically taking all the averages of women plus all the men who work full time. So you're taking women who work part time, seasonal, or full time, and you're putting them in a category up against men who work full time all the time. And the sad part about this, say, well, the full time women and the full time men should make the same. Well, not if the hours are wrong, not if the hours are different. You can't sit up here and tell me that you working 80 hours of pay deserve to be paid as much as a man that's working 90 to 120 to damn near 160 hours of pay. Just because you're doing the same job doesn't mean you're doing the same hours. Just because you believe that you're in the same job as a man, that don't necessarily mean you deserve to actually get paid the same amount of money as a man that's actually working those many hours a week. Then if you tell me something like, well, it's not fair, he's taking up all the hours so nobody can. 9 times out of 10, he probably waited to pick up all those hours to actually take on all those hours. He probably waited for somebody else to do it. Nobody did it. So he ended up stepping up and being a team player to actually pick up all the hours. Because 9 times out of 10, we all know women are coming in on the weekend and they're not going to make every excuse not to want to have to come in to work. For all intents and purposes, is typically how that works. And the sad part about that, when you actually equate the fact that women call off more, women take more time off, women work less, or women work part time, or women have problems with childcare, you tend to find out why women get paid less than men for all intents and purposes. But nobody wants to argue that. Nobody wants to say that because you're wrong and you're shaming women for wanting to do all this stuff. No, you're not shaming women. You're basically telling the truth on why they make less than men. And this is typically one of the many problems that you tend to have with women in this day and age. And the fact that, like I said, they're the societal elephant in the room for this reason. For you can't sit up here and complain about all this stuff and not turn around and actually fix any of this stuff to make yourself a better person. It doesn't work like that because the minute you're basically, like I said, just as an addict, you don't just give an addict money to better themselves because they're going to do nothing but go out and spend it on themselves and destroy themselves even more on coke or crack or whatever their drug of choice is. They're just going to go out and just get more of it. The sad part about that is you can't sit up here and help a person by moving them in your house because now they're at an advantage because they can sell all the stuff in your house so they can get their drug of choice. This is typically how this stuff works. So at the end of the day, you have to be able to accept the fact that you have a problem, then turn around and actually be willing to actually fix the problem. Then people can actually help you properly get to where you need to be in life. This is typically how this stuff works. The problem with women is they pretend like they don't have a problem and they don't want to accept the fact that they have a problem. So therefore, they remain in this constant cycle of bad luck, we'll call it, for that reason. Because you got to have to actually accept the fact that if you're doing something wrong, it's not everybody else's fault. You're the common denominator in this whole entire equation. Therefore, you got to address yourself and not everybody else. Because at the end of the day, if something's wrong with you and you know something's wrong with you, you can't blame everybody else for something being wrong with you. Good example of that is if you're dating somebody who has money, but you want a man that has good D, you can't be mad at the man for not having good D. It's your decision to date that man in the first daggone place, so you can't be mad at him for not being able to dick you down right for all intents and purposes. This is how that works. Same thing goes for everything. You can't pass blame off for a decision you make. That's simply how it works. And the sad part about that, a lot of people get away with it or do their best to divert attention away from them because nobody wants to accept responsibilities for something that they did wrong or their faults. Because sad part about working on faults, you basically have to challenge yourself and actually have to face yourself to overcome your faults. Can't do that, then you end up weak and you end up focusing on other people so you can feel good about yourself. And that's typically the easiest way to do it. By focusing on other people or projecting your problems onto other people so you can feel as though you're a better human being, when in fact you should just work on yourself first, then try to go help other people. Typically, like how Jordan Peterson says, clean your room first before you try to go out and clean the world. You can't clean your room first, then you shouldn't try to go out and clean the world at all in the least bit. Do yourself first, then go out and try to fix the world. And the sad part about that, nobody wants to do that, and they always want to project or they want to virtue signal that they're great people by trying to help all these people, when in fact their help is either falling on deaf ears or their help is not exactly on point like they believe it to be, but then they want to blame you for not accepting their help or get mad at you for not thanking them for helping you when in fact they made it worse than what it was in the first daggone place. It's typically how that works. Because a lot of the times the people who virtue signal the most actually make situations worse than what they really are. Like, oh, see, I did this and I fixed it. Then meanwhile, you're back in the ranch, you go and look at it. It's like, no, you just made the work. You made it worse. You made it a lot worse. You made it drastically worse. It's typically how that works for people that like to virtue signal how they're doing something for other people. They tend to make problems a lot worse than what they need to be. And the sad part about that is women don't see it that way because they have this Caesar Borgias victim savior complex, which typically is how a lot of this stuff works. Um, and the sad part about that, when you actually get that all together and look at it as a bigger picture, you tend to get my thumbnail thumbnail in the video for all intents and purposes. And the sad part about that is it's the most craziest, funniest thing in the world when it happens. And women aren't willing to accept the fact that they're doing wrong. So they blame everybody else for them doing wrong, or they blame the patriarchy for them doing wrong, or they blame their kids for them doing wrong, or they blame God for them doing wrong, or they blame the washer for them doing wrong, or they blame their car for them doing wrong. And it's like the list goes on and the stuff that they can blame for why it's not their fault while they're in the situation that they're in. Because at the end of the day, like I said, if a pandemic rolls around, everybody wants to act like a lady and everybody wants to find a man all of a sudden. They went from looking all independent to being strong, independent woman to scattering looking for men like roaches for all intents and purposes. And the sad part about that is it's not the fact that, it's not the fact that you're sitting up there being disrespectful the rest of the year. It's the fact that now all of a sudden that stuff is a shortage and you can't really go shopping for the stuff that you want and you feel helpless. Now all of a sudden you need a man now. Why? Why? And this is something that a lot of women do because like a lot of women will look for the man that they want and not the man that they actually need. The sad part about the men that they actually need is the men that actually need would actually make their lives better. The man that they actually want makes their lives worse. Like you can't be mad at the man that didn't fit you in the first place. And this is typically what women do. If a man doesn't want to be with a woman because he knows they're a wrong fit for each other, she'll shame him and say that he used her or abused her or all this other great stuff. And the reason why he's putting her aside because he just used her up and use her for anything or something. They basically just use some convoluted bullcrap to basically make it sound like that they were a victim the whole entire time when in fact he probably was a victim because he realized that this is not fitting and this is not working for us and we're not a right fit for each other. And they want to try to shame the men into continuing a relationship even though they know it's wrong inside and even though they know it's not what they want. And this is typically how women work and operate. They'll just shame you into believing that you are. And then later down the line, after they shamed you into believing that you get married to them 10 years later, now they're taking you for like 50 to like 100% of your assets now. And this is typically how women think and work. Like I said, women are only long-term thinkers when marriage is involved and they can actually benefit from it. And that's typically the only time women are long-term thinkers is when they can benefit from it. And that's the sad part about it, and that's the cold hard reality about it. And people don't seem to understand, or people always want to paint it in a guise or a light of, well, she didn't know, or well, this, that, and the other. It's like, no, she knows. She just wants the easy route out. That's all typically women want. They want the easiest, as most easiest as possible route to do something. They want the route of least resistance with no obstacles in the path to basically get their goal done. Because women are lazy like that, and that's typically how they work. Only time women are actually actively doing something is if they got to do something long term like marriage. And the sad part about that, they even suck at that. You pretty much know you're getting a divorce when the sex stops for all intents and purposes, and you know when they're cheating on you because the sex stops. And it's typically how that works. You can't sit up here and do something and then not expect, I mean, because at the end of the day, I look at it like this: if you're a man and you're in a marriage or you're in a relationship, if the sex stops, it's time to break up because she's already broken up with you. Typically how that works, especially if there's no medical problems going on with her. She's already broke up with you. It's time for you to break up with her. And the sad part about that, men need to learn to do this, and men need to learn how to put their foot down when stuff like this happens. Like I always said, life's too short for bad sex or no sex, and or a person with a badass attitude in your life. Life's too short for that. Really, it is. But I'm trying to see if I got everything in the daggone chat. If anybody's in the chat and they got questions, feel free to ask questions about this lovely thing. I already said, yeah, I covered shift blaming. I covered rape culture. Covered works, wants versus needs. I covered a lot of stuff in here. Yeah, I covered almost every single topic and manipulation, um, self sabotage, lack of self awareness, or lack of self actualization, crying. I've covered that too. Let's see. Well, there's a lot of topics in here. I haven't packed this one. Shaming, lying, being delusional. I already said lack of awareness. Projection. I already covered that. I'll cover it more, but I think I only touched on it lightly. Savior complex, God complex. Oh, savior complex. I'll do self projection and God complex. I already said lack of originality. I already covered that. Rape culture, single motherhood, covered that. Um, Fat acceptance covered that. Inequality covered that. Irrational covered that. Shifting the blame, I covered that. Structure, lack of structure. Oh, I got to cover that too. So I got structure, self projection, and God complex to actually basically. Oh, and false confidence. Um, Typically, what happens with those things is women tend to have. Oh, I actually did cover God complex because they have an overinflated ego on what they really are, what they're really worth. So I actually got to cover the other two. Um, thing about women when it comes to self projection and false confidence is women typically project how they're feeling or what's going on in their life onto other people so they can feel like they're helping other people. This is typically where that Caesar Borgia savior victim complex comes into play. The sad part about that, women could be going through this stuff, but they'll take it out on you and make it sound like you're going through the stuff instead of them actually going through the stuff and them dressing it properly themselves. Because women always want to have this air of confidence or air of they're good looking or they're all this stuff and they have no problems. So they tend to lie about the stuff that they're actually going through emotionally, mentally, and traumatically for all intents and purposes. And the sad part about that is they're willing to actually push forth an air of false confidence to make it sound as if they are better than or they are a quality person or a quality human being more so than any other person in a room, and are willing to actually go as far as to their confidence is so fake they're willing to destroy another woman to get the man that they want. They're willing to destroy another woman to get whatever they want, or they're willing to destroy a man to get whatever they want. That's typically a sign of a lack of self confidence or false confidence for all intents and purposes. Another thing that they do is another thing that they do is another thing that they do is project self projection. I've basically said that covered that when that one too. Self projection is the ability to have a problem, not deal with the problem, and project it onto somebody else, and then try to fix the problem on them. When in fact you should be fixing it on yourself in the first damn place, and not trying to correct somebody else for a problem that they don't have but that you have. Like a good example of that is a woman would project. A good example of that is I was talking about the whole entire fat acceptance or dating a trans person or something along the lines of that. That's pretty much a woman's projection on how she actually feels when she actually calls you the homophobe or she calls you the fat shamer or fat phobic person or transphobic person or racist person. The sad part about that, women are doing nothing more than projecting their feelings and their views onto you for something that you're probably not, that they 100% are. Like a good example of that is if if a woman accuses you of being fat phobic, 9 times out of 10 or 10 out of 10 times, it's because she's not willing to date a fat person. Um, if she's calling you transphobic, 9 out of 10 times or 10 out of 10 times, it's because she's not willing to date a trans person. Um, if she's calling you racist, 9 out of 10 times or 10 out of 10 times, it's because she's racist. So she's rejecting all these feelings and misdeeds and the things that she actually believes in herself that she actually feels guilty about onto you. It's typically how that stuff works. And the sad part about that is when it happens, a lot of men actually miss this, or a lot of other people miss this when it actually goes down in their presence. And the sad part about that is the way to overcome that is basically by matter of fact, don't even engage them and don't even let them even talk to you long enough to remotely even do that. But if you are going to let them talk to you long enough to do that, basically ask them the same questions. And typically, what you'll get, I'm willing to bet you any money, you'll get one or two things. You'll get my favorite one, which is the main favorite one is, well, I didn't ask this. It's not my question. It's you got to answer my question first, or it's not. This is not for me. This is for you, or I'm trying to help you understand why it's good to date this person. They basically make up all these convoluted excuses on why they can ask you this question and you can't ask them the same question back. That's typically how that works. A good example of that is if you're on a date, they'll ask you what you do for a living. Just ask them, how much do you weigh? Yeah, or ask them, what's your body count? Stuff like that. They ask you what you do for a living. You ask them what their body count is. Or you ask them, you know, how much do you weigh, or your body count, for all intents and purposes. Because at the end of the day, you can't let a woman get away with stuff at a relation in a during a date for the fact that you're going to end up with that same person that's asking you all these questions to try to pry and probe into your life. The sad part about that is women ask questions, they word questions in a way to make it sound as if they're not trying to pry into your life. A good example of that is a woman's willing to do that willingly for all intents and purposes, but a woman really loves when you actually divulge all the information for her. so she can actually form her own opinions. The minute you start divulging all the information for a woman, this is typically when a woman knows all about you and they pretty much have it out like it's a dragnet, like one of those squad room boards where they're trying to connect the crime and connect all the stuff that's happening, crimes in the neighborhood for all intents and purposes, is typically how that works. So anytime you divulge information to a woman, it goes up on her board. She starts connecting the dots on what she believes about you and what she perceives in you and how she sees you and how she can destroy you in the process of doing so. Is typically how this stuff works. So at the end of the day, don't divulge information to a woman that you don't want used against you. And if a woman asks you a question about what do you do for a living, ask her how much she weighs or ask her what her body count is. Or tell her that it's none of her business. Either way, you're going to get your point across and you're probably going to upset her. And you're going to get your point across. You're probably going to enjoy upsetting her. But the sad part about that, a lot of men will capitulate and fold under pressure and eventually tell somebody what they do for a living when in fact you don't even have to. You don't know the person from a can of paint. I look at it like this. If you're at a restaurant and it's a very expensive restaurant and you're paying for it, that right there alone is enough to actually let you know that the person has a decent job for all intents and purposes. And it's stuff like this that just blows my mind when I hear people do it or hear people say or do the stupid shit that they do, and they always want to equate, well, if he won't tell you what he lives, then let me tell you what he does for a living. Then obviously he's not a valued man. Okay, but you're at an expensive restaurant and he's drinking Johnny Walker Blue and or any other type of expensive drink that's like Johnny Walker Blue King James variant, which is highly fucking expensive for per shot, and you're trying to tell me that he's broke when he's drinking that drink. Yeah, that don't make no sense, and you're full of shit. For all intents and purposes, is typically how I always look at women that say that when they say a man is broke. I mean, do you know what he's drinking? Like, the sad part about that's happened to me a couple times too when a woman told me I'm broke, but my shot sets me back $36 a shot minimum if I go to Cincinnati to actually get the shot in my glass. But if I go anywhere else, it usually the minimum is $50 a shot, and it could be upwards of like $120 a shot for the drink that I drink. For all intents and purposes, at a bar that I would go to. Hell, and if I want Johnny Walker Blue King James variant, that could set me back anywhere between like 100 and something to 100. I would say about 100 to about $200 $300 a shot for all intents and purposes. So for me to actually be able to afford those shots lets me know that I'm probably not broke if I can afford those shots, especially if it's multiple shots and my bill is probably like damn near $1,000 after drinking, after having a good night of drinking for all intents and purposes. So it's those types of things that blow my mind when it comes to women that make me laugh at women because all of a sudden you're broke because you don't want to spend money on her, but your drink costs more than what she got on, and or whatever all the drinks that she could possibly drink in that night. And I've always found that funny how that actually works on principle for all intents and purposes. But like I said, I done drug this on enough. Y'all have a blessed day. Be good to yourselves. Uh, always better yourselves, and always look to always improve yourselves on any level or any way, shape, or form. Do good by yourselves. Do good with yourselves, by yourselves, and for yourselves, and always improve yourselves, and always be willing to help other people. Treat yourselves like milk. Do not spoil yourselves. Be good. Everybody have a good day. Be blessed and take care of yourselves. Adios, my niggas.